I draw flowers, and then as the professors were speaking, and then later on the test, if I drew the same flower, I could remember what they were saying. So it's really interesting how art and our bodies work.
Hey, I'm Becca with the Happy Ever Crafter, and on this week's interview, I'm talking to Sara Simon, who is also known as the Mint Gardener, and we get into why that's her name in this interview. But she's going to be teaching us a little mini lesson on how to do super easy watercolor illustrations. So if you follow Sara, you'll see that she's got some really beautiful work where she mixes watercolor with illustration, kind of botanical line drawings, and it's always really intrigued me how she does it. So in this lesson, she's walking us through exactly how she does it and showing us all of her tricks. So let's jump right in. Sara, welcome to the show. Sorry, I just said hello as you were taking a sip.
No, you're fine. Thank you so much for having me. It's fall, so I need to have my tea. It's chilly out, so.
I feel you. I'm here in like my super fuzzy warm sweater.
I love it.
So I've already done an intro of like what we're going to be doing in this conversation, in this mini lesson, but for people who might not know you, and because you and I just met, can you give us a little rundown of like who you are, what you do, where you are, all those fun things?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Sara Simon, and I am the Mint Gardener on Instagram, social media. I primarily share my watercolor and my botanical line illustrations, but I play in all sorts of things. I actually started painting in acrylics, and I've been painting and drawing all my life. Drawing is my first love, and it turns out it's like the backbone and skeleton of everything you do as an artist. So being able to conceptualize things, I've been sketching, doodling my whole life. I used to do it in my college notebooks, like all around the sides. And when I teach classes, I always tell people, I'm like, if you're one of those people that likes to draw as they hear something auditorily, it's really a benefit later, because I draw flowers, and then as the professors were speaking, and then later on the test, if I drew the same flower, I could remember what they were saying. So it's really interesting how art and our bodies work. So anyways, I'm fascinated by very nerdy stuff. And let's see, I am located in Seattle, Washington. It's actually an incredibly sunny day. This is what we get in the fall. It's chilly, but it's super sunny. So fall is like one of my favorites. What else would you like to know? See if that's a book.
Well, I do want to know about your books, but first I want to know, you must be into gardening because that's part of your name, but where did your name come from?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes, that's one of my favorites. So we live on a 1/4 acre in Seattle, actually, in a really old house, as you can see by some of my beams here. So it's an old house, rambler. We have lots of work to do on it, but we mainly focus on our garden. And my husband's really into garden. He gardens like I paint. So our hobbies and professions tend to go together. So it's kind of fun. But yes, so we live in a 1/4 acre. I'm actually looking out. We've got some grapevines outside. We have a really pretty greenhouse. And when we first moved here, we discovered we had very different gardening styles. My husband gardens in straight rows, and he plants kale, broccoli, corn, edibles, right? He saw absolutely zero purpose for lilies, dahlias. I was blown away. I was like, wait, that's the whole point of the garden. So we learned to work together, and every spring we kind of like barter on where in the garden we get to plant the annuals. He starts all of his edibles from organic seeds. And then I throw and I scatter, and then I get caught right in the summer when everything's blooming. He's like, you planted out of the rows. But yeah, so it's really fun. Actually, we have a lot of fun, and we have 2 little ones that really like the garden. So it's kind of a place where we can all hang. So spring and summer and fall is really just every season changes in the garden. So the Mint Gardener kind of was a joke between me and my husband. It came from my scattering. I scattered mint right when we first moved here, actually. So I scattered some chocolate mint seeds, and then I also transplanted a bunch of mint seeds from our apartment life into the garden, and it runs crazy. So we actually mow over our mint constantly because it's always creeping into the grass. So that was the idea, is I'm a mint gardener. You don't really garden mint. You use kind of he was kidding me a little bit. But I loved it because mint's resilient. I love that it grows in the sun or the shade. It doesn't take that much work, and it's hard to kill. So I'm really into that. I don't like plants that are easy to kill. And I don't know, I really like to drink mojitos, so that also helps, having a little bit of mint. But yeah, so that was where the mint gardener came in. I was, when I first started my Instagram, I was very nervous to share my art. It was a very vulnerable feeling putting what I had created out there. So it was a little easier to share dahlias, which I'm surrounded by right now. Actually, the dahlias are all in bloom in Seattle and they're so pretty. But yeah, so it was easier to share photos of dahlias and lilies than it was to show my art. So I would do mostly garden, and then I would mix in pieces of my art, and then people wanted to see my art. So I felt so encouraged. And that was when the art started to take off, sharing it online. And I rarely show photos of plants now. I only share them in my stories. So,
well, I mean, I consider your drawings photos of plants because your drawings are plants and
right.
Your paintings are plants, which is the whole reason why you're here. Because I was super drawn to, no pun intended. Actually, you know what? Pun intended. I intend puns.
I'm cool with them.
I was drawn to your art because it's not that often that you see people like really beautifully pairing line drawings and illustration with the watercolors and having them kind of like mesh really beautifully together, which I love the way you do those. So I'm super excited to get into your lesson. But back to the mint thing for like 1 second. Yeah. I'm like super resonating with how much you're talking about like mint spreads, because my mom lives on the lake in Ontario, here where I live. And this year she discovered that mint also grows in the water on the lake. Like,
I did not know that.
All over the place at like the edge of the water, and it's growing in the water. And she's like, what do I do with this mint? Like, there's just so much of it. It's like growing like weeds. And I'm like, well, I guess it's better than other things. Like it's nice and like sort of useful, I guess. But anyway, no, I didn't know that either. And I think it's really funny that that's coming up right now because we were just talking about it.
Yeah, it's aquatic as well. I'm into it. Yeah, so if anyone ever has trouble and is like, I don't know what plants to grow, I kill everything. I'm like, put mint in a pot and put it near the sun and water it occasionally. You will be so successful.
I'm going to have to try that because I do kill plants.
There you go. You'll have to.
So I think we should just like jump in, because I know that people are here for the mini lesson, and I'm here for the mini lesson because I want to see how you do this and I want to do it myself. So maybe I will just take my face off here. I'll mute myself and let you go for it. And if I have any questions, I'll just jump back in.
Sounds great. All right, here we go on our lesson. These are 2 examples of what we are going to create today. You can see they're cards. It's just watercolor paper that I folded in half, and I painted the outside, and they're going to be really great little gifts you can give to people, or if you want to create your own little card line, these are going to be really helpful tutorials. So before we begin, I want to show you guys the materials that I'm using, just so you can get an idea. You see a lot of blue in my work on the Mint Gardener on my Instagram, and that's because I absolutely love Payne's Gray. Winsor & Newton is one of my all-time favorite brands of acrylic, watercolor, gouache, you name it. Winsor & Newton is amazing. And so you see a lot of blues coming through in most of my work, and it's usually because I've used this paint as a primary color, or I've mixed it in to create depth into another color, all right? And then the other colors that you see in these pieces are here. We've got stone blue, olive green, saffron orange, and mid yellow. You'll notice that these actually say gouache as well. So what I have learned is gouache and watercolor can really be used interchangeably when we're working on pieces that are this small. Sometimes I like the more chalky texture of gouache to add ink on top of, because I find that the ink doesn't, nibs don't get gummed up as much when you're using them on gouache, where watercolor sometimes they do. I don't want to let gouache feel intimidating at all. Gouache is just like adding cream to your coffee. In fact, I've got a really good example. happen to be drinking my coffee right now in my beautiful little convivial mug. And you notice that it's opaque, right? You can't see through it. And that's all that gouache is. It takes watercolor from that transparent ability, which you can see is kind of a transparent, you can see the paper beneath. And then gouache just takes it one step further and doesn't let you see through it. So it's like adding cream to your coffee. All right, so that's our paint. We have got, you notice I've got a Sakura of America Pigma Micron pen. I love the 01 nib for this kind of work. They've got really nice fine points and they're wonderful to work with. And then we've also got the Winsor & Newton 03, so, or 0.3 right here. So I have found that the Winsor & Newton 0.3 is actually equivalent to the 01 on the Micron. And these pens are just great. They work fabulously over watercolor and under watercolor. So if you're familiar with my work, you know that oftentimes what I'll do with a piece is I will ink the entire piece and then I will watercolor it. In this tutorial, we're actually going to play a little bit and we are going to watercolor first, add the paint first, and then we're going to ink. I find that it's fun to just kind of switch it up, and really these pens and these paints can handle both. When I ink afterwards, I feel like the result is a bit more playful, where when I ink beforehand, you can't see the lines quite as well. So when you ink afterwards, it's kind of a bit more of a playful, whimsical look, which is kind of what we're trying to do on these cards, okay? The other materials that you need are paper. So we are working actually on a hot press paper, so a smoother texture. Generally, I work on Han Mule watercolor paper, and I usually work on the rough or the cold press. It has a really great texture. Watercolor bleeds beautifully. However, when you're adding ink, like we are in these pieces, when you have a bit more texture to the paper, it's actually harder to work on because the ink, right, if you can imagine drawing on a rough surface rather drawing on a smoother surface, it's a little bit easier to draw on a smoother surface. So for this piece, I actually tried to do it on the rough, and you can see that like little bits of the pen like give out, right? And that's just because the texture of the paper. So for this project, we're actually going to do the hot press because it has no texture. And also one benefit of working on hot press is that you can scan these cards much easier than if you were to work on rough press, because then you have to remove all that texture when you're working in the digital world, right? So this also, I love this student grade Canson. It's 140 pound weight. This is cold press, but as you can see, we're going to be working with it. It actually has very little texture, so this is a really great brand to get when you want to just make some inexpensive cards. It's 140 pound cold press, or you can get the hot press version of it, and they both work great. So I wouldn't be too fussy about it, but you just want something smooth. And also the nice thing too, when with watercolor, you're often covering larger expanses of surface. With these botanical illustrations, we're just covering little bits of the paper. So you really don't need to worry about having a paper that's super absorbent. You want it thick, right, so that it doesn't warp, but you don't need it to be super absorbent. So that's why the cold press or the hot press works wonderfully. Okay, let's see what else we've got here. Paintbrush, that's going to be essential. I'm using Peggy Dean, the Pigeon Letters, round 4. I find her brush set is just fabulous. Hers and also Wonder Forest, Dana Fox, she makes beautiful synthetic brushes as well. And they're both cruelty-free brushes, which I just love, and they work wonderfully. So I'm going to use this. It's a round 4. The reason I use rounds, first, let me tell you, rounds, there's nothing fancy about it. So if you were to just look straight down the paintbrush, do you notice this metal, the metal ferrule right here, is the ferrule, and where it touches the brushes or the bristles is actually round. So that's why it's called a round. And the 4 is just the degree of how much thickness we've got. You could do around 1 or around 20, just depends on how thick you want, right? So I like the round 4s because of the versatility that I can get in the brush. With just the lightest amount of pressure, you can make a very, very thin line, and we'll need that to make a little bit more of our detailed leaves today. But then you can change the pressure in your brush, and just by simply pressing further, you can see just pressing a little bit further. Do you see how that expands the bristles? So the lightest amount of pressure gives you just a thin line, and then expanding the bristles gives you a thick line. So just in one brush, you have a lot of versatility, just how a round brush is made, and that's why I absolutely love using them. They hold a lot of water, they deliver the water in the paint well, and then I can make thin and thick lines all in one brush, okay? So this is what we're aiming to make. We will start, I like to start with a little pencil circle. So I just take some watercolor paper, I fold it in half. Sometimes taping it with a little bit of washi tape to keep it flat is really helpful. It just keeps everything super flat, so you're not worried about your card popping up as you paint. So a little bit of washi tape, anything that'll just, drafting tape, whatever that you can use. And then I have my handy dandy little Le Creuset, anything that's round. So I'm not too fussy here about anything round, but I want to have like a bowl so that I have enough space to create with, but then also it's small enough so it's still petite and fits on my brush. So I'm just gonna very lightly give myself a round circle line. All right, see that round circle? It's faint. The idea with this is just to provide guiding lines. So this is a guiding line. You're not gonna be keeping the pencil line. You're gonna try and erase it as best as you can after you've added your paint and your pen. So I'm gonna tape this second one so it's ready to go. Draw my little circle. I'm leaving it open at the top because sometimes I like to do some detailed little leaves at the top, so I don't need to add that much pencil. So see, I've just got a nice little round. So it helps my eye kind of know where to paint next. Okay, so I'm gonna move my paints, get my palette all set. I've already poured my paints, but I find it's really helpful to either pour them ahead of time the night before so that you have a nice dry palette to work with and the paints are dried up. That's part of the reason I love watercolor and gouache, is because you can work with them so well. We need our paintbrush. And here's the palette that we're going to be working on. So this nice marble surface that you see me working on is actually just, it's plastic. It's replica surfaces. They do fabulous, beautiful marbles and shiplap and beautiful things so that you don't need to have brand new marble countertops to display your work. You can just purchase one of hers and then all of your things look so beautiful, right? So I've already got the Payne's Gray and the Stone Blue on. We're gonna start with that one first. So I'm gonna get my paintbrush wet, notice from side to side. Something that I like to say in watercolor, and you'll hear more, my book is actually coming out this November, and in my book I talk about making the magic sauce, all right? So I find that painting can feel a bit intimidating for people that are just beginning, or even people that have painted with acrylic switching to watercolor, finding that correct texture that you bring to your actual paper. So I like to use analogies when I teach, and this is how I use it in my book, and this is what I do when I teach classes live. So my food analogies work wonderfully, right? Because everybody has to eat, and most people are familiar with sauces, most cultures, right? So soy sauce and wasabi is what we're trying to create. It's 80% water and just 20% paint. With watercolor, one of the joys is that you keep coming back to the same palette and get to reanimate the colors that are already there. But you also don't use that much paint when you're painting. So it's really more water. Okay, so once you've got a nice little, if you know, wasabi is your texture of the paint, I'm dragging a little bit of water away to really get that texture there. Once you've got a nice texture going, we can start making leaves. So I would suggest watching this tutorial and then go ahead and dive right in. But sometimes watching it first can be really helpful. And if you have some scrap paper next to you, I'm gonna grab some actually really quick right here. So you can test out and kind of try some leaves beforehand. So the way I like to teach leaves is point, pressure, point. So you make contact with the paper with just the point of your brush, and the lightest amount of pressure makes a little mark, right? So then what you do is you continue the stroke with point, pressure, and then you finish the stroke up with a point. So what I've done is it's one fluid motion that I'm pulling down, all right? So I'm pulling down at the same time, but I'm changing the pressure. So point, increase the pressure, decrease the pressure. So there's a pretty leaf. And then you can make it even a fancy leaf, point, pressure, point, connecting the two, and then you've got a nice leaf with a vein inside. You can do small leaves because this brush is so versatile. You can do thicker leaves. You can start to curve your leaves. So this is leaf making is actually one of my most calming, mindful things. Watercolor in and of itself is really a calming thing. So just a calming exercise to make it a part of your day or just your creative routine. But I know that when my family's like, movie night, I actually get my paints out and I sit next to my family and I paint leaves. And then I am practicing my watercolor, I'm relaxing, and I'm also having family time. So this is just a really great, you can do little leaf chains, things like this. Again, I teach this in my book, Modern Watercolor Botanicals. And it's a really good exercise to just hone your skills, work on your brush, maneuvers. All right, so there you go. There's some leaves, and that's what we're gonna be doing. Now, remember, we're kind of aiming for this type of wreath, right? So notice there's not paint all the way around, but there is ink all the way around. So we're just gonna paint in some leaves, some little, some big. They point all different directions as they do in nature. Leaves are rarely facing one direction. So I take my brush, I grab some of that magic sauce that I've mixed on my palette, and I'm just gonna dive right in. I like to start on the side and just start making small leaves. I pop around a lot because what I've found is one brush full of paint can make several leaves, right? And sometimes it's fun to see the same color appear on different parts of your wreath. So sometimes I want like little small ones. Let's get some more dramatic dark ones. All right, make a bigger one there. And then we're gonna make another bigger one here. And there's no real rhyme or reason, but just kind of trying to add different colors in these different shades. Got that darker Payne's gray again right here. And then sometimes it's pretty to just add a little bit of a little one right here. Just using the point of my brush. And as a lefty, you have to be really careful not to drag my hand back through my work, which I've done many a time. No worries if you do. There's paper towels to dab those mistakes up. So there you go. There's another little leaf. Here we'll do another leaf right here. So as a note of encouragement, I painted my first leafy wreath similar to this, but on a bigger scale. Gosh, it had to be about over 5 years ago. And it took me over 4 hours. So I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I do like to do things right the first time, and it wasn't working right. But the thing with watercolor is you really have to just kind of learn to go with the flow. And if a leaf isn't perfect, you just walk away. And honestly, she'll blend in with her neighbors so well you won't even tell. You won't even be able to see her at the end. And sometimes this leaf making shape feels a little bit foreign. So practicing that and then getting that smoothness, and then you know that your brush is going to create the leaves that you want, right? So really, this little guy, notice I moved her around a lot. I never work on a solid plane with watercolor. I like to move around just because then I can access different points of the wreath. Just one more 4, I think. Yep. And she's done. You don't want to overdo it because we got to leave space for the botanical illustration with our fine liners. Okay. So now we're going to play with creating this other one. Let me see. So I'm going to do something similar to this, but not exactly the same. And again, you'll see me using those paints that I mentioned at the beginning. And I kind of have a little inspired piece. Let's flip my palette around. This palette, by the way, is so beautiful. Sara from Sylvan Clayworks makes them. She hand makes these beauties. And I'm going to have a holiday gift guide coming up on my Instagram, and she's going to be one of the features, as will Mandy from Replica Surfaces. They're just wonderful, wonderful tools that have become, they're exciting to work on, and so it's exciting to paint. And sometimes, you know, it's just like an exercise regimen, right? If you're not excited to exercise, sometimes buying a new pair of pants is exactly what you need to do, right? Okay, so again, I'm going to kind of surround my round shape in a leafy wreath pattern. This time I'm going to just shape it with the leaves here. This one's a bit more uniform. You see how I'm using the same green, but different intensity. So if there's more water, the leaves are going to come out a little bit lighter, right? But then if it's a little bit more concentrated into our wasabi, if we're going to carry on that analogy, it's going to be a brighter, bolder leaf, right? I'm going to do a few in this, right? It's that point pressure, point motion again. Don't beat yourself up if you're not getting it. And I do a lot of leaves, like I said, and it's practice, really. A lot of it is just practice. One little hand trick, though, that I can show you, if you're finding that your leaves are looking like slugs, watch my hand. So if you're pulling your leaves down like this or like this, and you're like, why are my leaves looking like lines or like little bitty slugs? What you need to do, see how my brush was up? If you bring it down so it's almost parallel with your thumb, the pulling down, you're able to access more of that brush. Do you see how I'm just able to get that width in there? And then remembering to complete your leaf is key. So the reason my leaves end at such a point and begin at such a point is because I spend time there, right? I'm applying a light amount of pressure as I'm dragging, then increasing, and then completing it. And do you see how it's staying parallel with my thumb? So that really gives you the thickness that you want. Again, practice, play. And the cool thing about botanical line illustration too is your leaves, the underlying watercolor doesn't have to be perfect. See how they're not filling the space total. I'm shaping the leaves really with my black micron ink or my fine liners at the end, okay? So let's give this a little bit more leaves. And then we'll add some flowers. Get another little bit. And this is oxide of chromium right here. I didn't mention that paint at the beginning, but because it's so close on my palette, they are tending to bleed together. And so that olive green and the oxide of chromium are really making these leaves up. So that's what those colors are. There's a nice little pretty one. Little guy up here. And notice I'm not drawing in the vine either. That's something that I'm going to add with my pen. I don't know, this looks pretty good. Let's see if we can add a few more here. A little bit more leaves. And then we'll start to introduce a floral. So we'll give it a little stem. Remember, light pressure on your brush allows you to make that thin mark. Using that soy sauce and wasabi magic sauce on your palette enables you to access that amount of paint that you want so that it delivers well onto your paper. We'll do a few little leaves. This is growing. It's a beautiful growing thing. Maybe we'll connect this now just so they look like they're growing together. Maybe another little leaf and see what that looks like. It's really a play. I mean, that's why we create, right? It's so nice to just be able to play and have fun. Okay, I'm gonna grab some yellow here and I'm gonna move this down so you can see me actually accessing my palette. Scoot you down. All right, see if you can get my yellow in there. You can see this? Just barely. Here we go. Okay, so we're gonna create some little shapes, but again, before I begin, I'm making sure I have my nice sauce. Notice your water might be as green as mine. They say in watercolor that your mason jar of water, your wash water should not be, basically if you wouldn't put a goldfish in it, you shouldn't be painting out of it. But I don't mind working out of wash water that has a little bit of color in it. I actually think that it's pretty and it colors up your piece really beautifully. But if you are trying to do a light blush flower and you've got a blue base wash, you might want to clear that out. So now I'm doing this same point, pressure, point for my petals. You see, point, pressure, point. That's why this little brush stroke is so fabulous. Let me make sure we're not moving here. This brush stroke is so fabulous because you can really work with it and hair out of there. You can really work with it to do petals and leaves. It's a really versatile stroke. And again, it's because of that round brush. Had some leaves, little happy daffodil shapes. Daffodil shaped daisies. I start off with a botanical and then I kind of go off on my own. So I'm just gonna accent my florals, and again it's right next to my yellow, so I'm just gonna dab it in, and because this is a hot press paper, you do not see the bleeding that you would normally see on a cold or a rough press, but this is Perylene Maroon and Perylene Violet, and they're really close to my yellow right now, so I'm just dabbing them in to add a little bit of depth. It's kind of fun. You could do a purple. I'm gonna add a little bit of blue leaves, those stone blue leaves, or stone blue petals. Let's do some petals. We need more flowers in the center. Again, point, pressure, point to just suggest you're hinting at some really pretty wildflowers. They don't have to look like a specific type of flower. Move this over so you can see a little better. Okay, maybe one more petal there, kind of pretty. And then I'm gonna add some really deep Payne's Gray little berries, because what I'm doing is I'm playing with the composition, right? I'm not just painting leaves, I'm adding variety in my shape, in my color, balancing everything out. Again, these are analogous colors. Yellow and green and blue are all next to each other on the color wheel, so they talk nicely. These colors, when they get together, they chat and they hang out really beautifully. So you can always pick analogous colors, colors that are all next to each other on the color wheel, and you know that they'll be pals. All right, so these guys need to dry. Okay, we're ready to add our ink. So you know your watercolor is dry, one, because it doesn't have movement or shine anymore, right? So when you hold it up to the light, is the paint still shiny? Is it moving at all on the surface of the paper? So no movement and shine, we should be good. Another trick, if you have sensitive hands, you can hover your hand over your actual work, and if it feels like a coldness is coming up off the paper, that actually means that it's too wet to work with. And if you're nervous about smudging your watercolor at all or any of your paint, you can just wait until the next day and no big deal. So I'm actually going to use my fine liner, my Winsor Newton. Most people have microns, and so they know how they work, so it's kind of fun to play with the new tool and let people play a bit here. So this is, again, the wreath that we're going to be completing, and I've got a nice dried watercolor circle. The pencil lines are still there as a guidepost, so I can fill in some botanical leaves, kind of where there's gaps, but I'm also going to add black line on top of my leaves to add a little bit of variety, make it look different, okay? So people are always afraid to start because it can feel a little daunting. What you want to do is you always want to start on kind of a peripheral leaf. So a leaf that maybe isn't the focal point. And what I'm doing is I am just drawing a slight shape here. My glasses are right by my tripod here. So there, this line, so almost like an eye, like an eyeball, an eye slit. So it's just like a horizon line, like a bow. And then we're gonna draw a line straight down the middle, or as Allie Kay says, elementary school down the middle, all right? All right, so right down there. And then I'm gonna give you a little bit of personality. Notice I'm not tracing exactly on the paint lines. Sometimes it's fun to just kind of work outside the lines and have a little bit of freedom. All right, so we're just gonna draw those leaves in. Let's see if we can draw a nice little leaf here that might connect them and complete the wreath. All right, I'm following that shape slightly, right? Just gonna continue to move around. Add a little leaf here. So continually pulling back and seeing what you did and how your wreath is shaping up is always helpful. Like, okay, it looks a little heavy on this side. I need to make sure I add more leaves here. Okay, remember your pencil lines will be erased at the end. So adding a little leaves to complete the wreath circle is always nice. I think I'm gonna add a little one right here. Sometimes it's easier to draw that center line first, and then the side ones can follow. Everyone's gonna work a little bit differently, but that's the beauty in art. I'm just gonna continue to work my way around this circle. I'm using one hand to really stabilize my work. My right hand is my stabilizer and my left hand is my drawing hand. Love to know how many of you are left-handed versus right-handed. That's always so fun. You should comment and tell Becca and she can give me the percentage. It's always so interesting. But yeah, that's my left hand is my drawing hand, my primary hand. Actually, my mom and my sister and I are all lefties. But I'm the oldest of 5, and the youngest 3 are all righties. And my dad is also right-handed. So it's always interesting how those percentages work out. Usually I'll be teaching a class and I'll be the only lefty. It always blows me away. All right, we're almost done working our way around. We can kind of step back and look back, like I said, always reevaluating, kind of going, oh, another little leaf. We need another one right there. And then here, let's do this one. Again, this is just a loose and playful way to do a wreath. Again, a great card. Everybody loves getting nice things in the mail. It's always a fun gesture, and it really doesn't take that long to do, right? So then you've got a nice, pretty little wreath. You've done all your ink around, and I would give it, I don't know, an hour or two before I go back and erase the pencil lines. Just give it time for the ink to fully settle in before you run an eraser over it. I like to use art gum erasers. They're called art gum, literally ARTGUM, and they're designed to absorb graphite. So in about an hour or two, I'll come back and erase all those pencil lines, and then you'll end up with a little wreath that's almost like the leaves are floating just a bit, and it's just kind of this happy, chill little wreath. Okay, that guy's done. Let's ink this baby. Okay, similar process. I'm gonna work from the outside in, and I might, again, if the paper keeps popping up like it does, you could either paint it flat and fold it later. I like to fold it beforehand because then I know where I want my focal art to be. Sometimes if I fold it afterwards, I'm like off a little bit. Okay, so art's down. I'm just gonna start with my leaves. And you don't always have to do the same leaf pattern. You can mix it up a little bit if you wanted. I find that this is just a really nice, simple way to continue a pattern because there is a little bit going on with multiple colors. Our world is so busy. It's kind of nice to just add some simple leaves. All right, here we go. Now this one, I might add a little bit of the wreath as it goes around. So I'm just hinting at stems, just kind of doing this, hinting that a stem is connected. And again, we are striving for progress over perfection. A little bit of wobbly lines is normal in the beginning, especially if you're not used to working with pen. Wobbly lines are your body's way of learning, and you're creating muscle memory by learning the shapes of botanicals. Okay, so all of our leaves are drawn. Let's do some berries. So to do the berries, I'm just going to show you the outline. It's just a simple circle and then a few little squiggles. Again, nothing fancy. And it looks silly without paint, but when you do it on paint or around the paint, it's like all of a sudden it's a little blueberry. All right, see that? And then I'm going to draw a few little lines like it's connecting somewhere. And then another little squiggle. Nothing fancy. The playfulness of this style, it's better to be a little bit less precise and a little bit more playful. That way you have fun, the pressure's off. It actually ends up looking really fun afterwards when you don't worry about it too much and you kind of draw outside the paint lines. Okay, those are our berries and little suggestions of where they attach botanically. And then these leaves, or these petals, just gonna kind of very similar to the leaf shape with a little squiggle on the top. So again, I'll show you this. So I'm going up like the leaf shape, up like the leaf shape. So we're almost like doing that half eye and then a little squiggle at the top, okay? So wildflower, boom, boom. And again, playful is key here. You can suggest some in the front and some in the back. Pretend like they're attached there. And if working with a pen makes you nervous because you're really loving your masterpiece of a card, you can absolutely draw with pencil first and then go over it in pen and erase your pencil lines. Again, I have no problem with that. I understand when you've created something beautiful and you really want it to turn out, and it's like, I've spent all this time. Feel free to do a pen, or a pencil. I use just an HB pencil, like you saw me draw those circles with. It's actually just like a regular graphite pencil, number 2, I believe. And they erase really easily with that art gum eraser. So, all right, we've done those. And then these petals are very much like my leaves. I think I'm gonna just outline them, and their little centers are gonna connect closely, right? So I'm gonna draw them out, and we connect right there in that perylene maroon color. Just a little playful petal. And sometimes you can add like a little texture. I'm just doing 2 small marks. This is all I'm doing right here, is just petal, complete the petal, and then some little playful marks. Petals often have texture and variety that makes it look different than the leaves. And even though this is going to be the same shape as the leaves, you make it look a little bit different by adding that variety inside. So again, side, side, connect them there in that center. All right. And then our last petal kind of goes out. I'm going to let it draw behind. And so the petal is in the the leaf is in the foreground. Some more little interest on our petals. Look at how cute that is. That turned out so fun. Yay. Okay. There's that one and this one. And we created our little cards. I would absolutely love to see how yours turned out. I'll tape these babies on. And please DM me on Instagram, and Becca as well. And feel free to ask me any questions. I love talking paint with people. I love chatting about botanicals. And I love just chatting about materials and supplies and kind of technique. So I hope you enjoyed this. So much fun. I'm excited to see what you guys make.
Sara, thank you so much for that lesson. I'm so excited to try it myself. And I'm sure that if people weren't following along as you did that they will want to try it really soon too.
Yeah, good. That's my hope. Watercolors can be a really accessible tool. It's a fun way to play and to be creative, and especially something you can work into kind of a busy day. You can do 20 to 30 minutes of something creative, make a really beautiful card, feel accomplished, and then move on with your day.
Yeah. And I love how like easy and carefree and like approachable that was, like that exact style where you're doing some watercolor, some illustration, just kind of like whatever you feel like at the time. I love it.
Playful.
Yeah. So speaking of like loving your style and wanting to learn more from you, I know you have books coming out, and I feel like, well, maybe if people are watching this in the future, they're already out, but can you talk to us a little bit about those and where people can find them and stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now they're for pre-sale on Amazon, but next month they will be for sale on Amazon and all sorts of different online retailers. The distributor is Penguin Random House, so it'll be, I know it's real exciting.
That's
so
a big deal.
It is. It's a really big deal. I'm working with Blue Star Press, which is a fabulous publisher, and their distributor is now Penguin, so it worked out really well. Yeah, I'm really excited. It took writing a book was it was a big task. I wanted to make it approachable, accessible, all those keywords. I wanted people to feel like wherever they were in their watercolor journey, that they could sit down with a group of friends, or if they just wanted to sit down individually and had 20 to 30 minutes, that they could sit down, learn something new, and feel like they scratched that creative itch. So each of the lessons is actually designed with a beginner, intermediate, and advanced option. So if you do sit down with a group of friends and you've been watercoloring with me for 5 years or whatever, you can jump right to the more advanced. Where if you're sitting with a group that's never watercolored, or even like I've had 13, 14-year-olds come and sit down at my classes. I provide all of the lines, so nobody has to learn to draw and paint in the book. All the lines are there, so you can kind of trace the lines and then kind of follow a more simplified version so that it feels approachable. So yeah, if you were to go through the book, and you could literally do it 3 times at 3 different levels, which is fun. So you would learn a lot. So that's my watercolor book. It's called Modern Watercolor Botanicals.
That's so fun. I feel like so many people in my audience have told me that they like to do like crafty things with their kids, and a lot of them are like you know, a little bit older, like 12-ish. And if you could
Yes.
sit down and like your kid could do the beginner one and you could do the more advanced one, so fun.
Yeah, I have a 7, almost 8-year-old daughter, and she absolutely loves sitting down and learning and drawing with me and painting. So one tip too, I've actually given her a few books to learn to draw, just to hone her skills. She uses Allie Kay's Modern Florals book, and I think Allie's been on with you before.
Mm-hmm.
So but yeah, it was such a great way to learn to draw florals. And oftentimes in my watercolor classes, people would be like, okay, so I go home and I don't have your lines, right? So when you've used all the traceables in my book and you want to learn to draw your own florals, to make your own pieces, Allie's book is super helpful learning to draw florals and just botanical C and S shapes. You can really draw a lot. So yes.
So I will link to all of your books that you said they're available for pre-order. So I'll link to them down below for people, or if you're watching this in the future, they're probably available. But where else can people find you, Sara?
You can find me on Instagram. The Mint Gardener is my handle. I have a website, but websites these days, they don't tend to get updated quite as frequently. But yeah, so the Instagram is going to be the most immediate. And then I have a link tree with all of my different hyperlinks of where you can find my books. And then in 2020, I'm doing a national book tour. So I'm going to a bunch of big cities around the country, signing books and teaching workshops from the book. So you'll have to link. Yeah, I'll send you the links for all those too when those get settled. I'm working on all the different locations.
Yes, absolutely. I will put all the links down below for everybody. And just to mention to everybody, if you end up painting the projects that Sara did in this little mini lesson, we would love to see them. So tag both of us on Instagram. I'll put the handles here. And other than that, though, thank you so much, Sara, for coming on. It was so nice to meet you and learn from you. And I can't wait to see what people come up with.
Thank you so much, Becca. This was so much fun. Thank you, everyone. Can't wait to see your projects.
All righty. I'll talk to you later.